I was saying earlier that I was talking to a friend of mine this morning, and he's been in love with racing since the 1950s. And I told him that I was interviewing you today, and he got excited about that. He I thought that he was going to invite himself to do the interview with us.
Well, I did a lot of racing. My golly.
Yes, sir.
Started on the motorcycles for years for Harley Davidson. And I started dabbling with stock cars, and pretty soon I'm going full bore with the stock cars. So,
I just want to make sure that all of our viewers and listeners on the podcast know what Mr. Goldsmith has done. He's had a brilliant motorcycle career as a racer. He has been a NASCAR and a USAC stock car driver and in the NASCAR convertible division. He has raced in the Indianapolis 500. And during the years he raced in the Indianapolis 500, it was considered an international championship race. Therefore, he got world points like he would today in Formula One. So he had all that going for him. And that's just a brilliant career that has been highlighted by the fact that he's in the American Motorcycle Association Hall of Fame and in the Motorsports Hall of Fame of America. So I tell you what, it's just a real honor to talk with Mr. Goldsmith today.
there's one other racing deal that I did quite a while. I was in the standard bred race horses for a few years with a friend, and I drove them too.
Well, just can't keep up with you, sir.
The horses was a lot of work to drive them. It was I don't know, you had to be pretty careful with it.
Exactly.
Well, Mr. Goldsmith, just to start off with, at what point did you realize that you like to go fast? Because obviously that's something that you did for a long time, and it must have started out at a young age. You, like you mentioned, you raced motorcycles, then you did cars, you did horses. So obviously at some point you realized that you like to go fast. When did that happen?
Well, that'll happen when you can make a living doing it. So that's about the way I would phrase it, because I wasn't too interested if I didn't make enough money to live a decent life. So I just kept moving up from the horses to the motorcycle and the stock cars. The stock cars was the biggest thing for me.
Right. How did you get into motorcycle racing? As I recall, weren't you working for Chrysler at one time?
Yeah, I used to work for Chrysler, but how I got involved with motorcycle racing, I got a phone call one time from Walter Davidson from Harley Davidson Motorcycle Company, and he wanted me to come over and meet with him. So I went over there and I think I had lunch with him, Walter and Bill Davidson, and they wanted me to race them motorcycles a lot more than I was. So they supplied me with a lot more parts and engines and things like that. And I just raced more races. I just spread out and went traveling a little further. I lived in Michigan at the time, and my God, I was traveling clear the West Coast to race.
Now, you mentioned the fact that you started dabbling in stock car racing in the early 1950s. How did that come about?
Well, there was a race going to be held at Detroit Fairgrounds. It's a mild dirt track. And a guy asked me to drive his car. I said, "Oh, sure, I'd love to do that." So I got in his car and we won the race. And that's the first race that I was ever in a stock car. I think it was 250-mile track. It was a mile track on dirt. It's a fairgrounds in Detroit. But that's what really started me in stock car business. When I did that, wasn't too long after that I got a call from Smokey Eunuch from Daytona, and I was going to be racing the motorcycles down there. And he wanted to know if I'd come down early and practice in one of his cars, and maybe would take and race it. I was on the beach at that time, and they'd race on A1A and on the highway, and then go out on the beach and race 2 miles back north. And so I got to drive his stock car at that time too.
And as Goldsmith enters the north turn, he begins to run wide open. Turner in Ford number 26 is too close for comfort.
Imagine might take some adaptation to go from motorcycles to stock cars. So how much of an adjustment was it for you to go from motorcycle racing to stock car racing?
The motorcycle racing was, I'm going to say, a little more work than driving a race car. I mean, you're out in the open, and you've got to be a little more careful. It's just a little bit different driving a motorcycle on these here dirt tracks, and just keep from breaking a leg or something anyway.
Now, you ran stock cars in both the USAC and NASCAR ranks. How much of a difference was there between the two sanctioning bodies at that time?
There was a tremendous amount of difference for fans, and all this stock car racing was up in the northern part. I don't know how far south they would go. I don't remember. But AAA ran stock cars for quite a few years, and they was drawing a lot of people. And I raced for them, I don't know how many years. And finally, Smokey Eunuch called me, and that moved me down with NASCAR.
Well, your career in NASCAR shows 127 races entered over 11 years, and you won, I think, 9 times in the stock cars in NASCAR. Now, USAC, you were a champion 2 years, correct? Didn't you win that title?
I got first place for 2 years, and I got second place for another 2 years. So it was spread out over quite a bit of time. So,
well, that is excellent. Did Bill France Sr. ever say anything to you about racing in USAC at all, or did you not have any problem with that?
I didn't have much problem with that. Bill France, I got to know him pretty well. I own the airport here in Griffith, Indiana. And if you remember, Pure Oil used to be in Chicago, which is only 20 miles up the road here. And so he would fly in here with his airplane, and I'd drive him up to the Pure Oil company, and they'd negotiate. And I got a lot of people sitting around. And I think I met everybody in the Pure Oil company. It was at that time, it was a pretty big company. And I don't know how they do it today. I never paid no attention. But,
Mr. Goldsmith, you mentioned Smokey Eunuch, and you did win several races for him. And there are so many stories about him. There are so many legends about him. Who was the Smokey Eunuch that you knew?
well, he was a pretty good friend. I got to know him. He'd come to the motorcycle race, and he would see what I was doing, and if I wanted to ask him something about the sand on the beach or something like that, he would answer me pretty good. And in other words, if you run out close to that water, as long as there's no water, the beach was smooth and more firm, so you could run just a little bit faster. So things like that. And then if I need to change anything on the motorcycle, he would give me a hand and help me with it. So that's how I become pretty good friends with him. And then right after the race at Daytona, he told me, he says, we got a stock car. I got a couple of stock cars out here that needs rebuilt. He says, there's a race in Charlotte on I think it was a mile-high bank dirt track. And he says, we can go up there and race one of these cars if you'd want to do it. I said, well, I'd love to work with you on it. So we worked on the car for a couple of weeks, went up to Charlotte, and there's a mile dirt track, and their famous driver at that time was Curtis Turner.
Yeah.
And I had the fastest time. He had the second fastest time, but we took off racing, and I wanted to follow him as close as I could, just to see how he went through the corners and what he did. And it worked out real good for quite a few, I forget how many miles, say 75. Then I hit a hole going into the corner sideways, and I rolled the car, landed back on the wheels, and I still finished second in that race. So it worked out pretty good.
So you rolled the car and then kept going?
Yes, that's what I did. It landed back on its wheels, and I was lucky the way it rolled and everything, and so I kept right in racing.
Your first NASCAR Cup Series win was 1956 in Langhorne. What do you remember about that day?
Well, I'd raced motorcycles at Langhorne. I knew the track very well. So I can't remember whose car I drove at that track. But anyway, I think I had the fastest time in the stock cars, if I remember right. These are first or second. And I went in the race. I can't remember how I finished, but I think I did pretty well.
Yeah, that was your win in 1955 for in a stock car at Langhorne.
Oh, I did better than I thought.
Now, I have always heard that Langhorne was an exceptionally tough racetrack to negotiate because it was essentially a circle. You didn't have any kind of straightaways whatsoever.
It was sort of a circle, and if you want to call it a turn, down in the first turn, it was in a valley. It was lower, and then if you come around the backstretch or whatever you want to call it, it was just a big circle track. So it wasn't a normal racetrack that they have with straightaways and that there was a little bit of a straightaway on the backstretch, and that was it.
Wow. Now, 1957, you won a race at Richmond, and you were driving for Pete DiPaolo, and Fireball Roberts finished second. He was also driving for Pete, and then Marvin Panch finished third in yet another Pete DiPaolo Ford.
Yes.
What was your reaction to having teammates?
I remember that very well. It was a 100-mile race, and I knew that we was going to have to stop for fuel. So what I did, I drafted Fireball Roberts real close, and I let off on the gas and saved a lot of fuel. And they wanted me to stop, and I wouldn't stop. So I finished the race, and I don't think I had much fuel left, but at least that's how I won the race.
And 1958 was a big year for you because you started off by winning the last race on the Daytona Beach and Road Course. What do you remember about that day?
Well, I remember a little bit about it, and I just had a very good car that Smokey had built. Smokey Eunuch, he built the car and the engine, and I helped him work on it for about 2 weeks before I went to race on it with it. And we tried it out. We took that car out on the back. It's north of Daytona on a highway, and there's no traffic on this big road, and it's a straightaway. And I run it up that straightaway a lot of different times to see how it would handle, how it would accelerate when you'd slow down and get going again. So that's how we set the car up on the gear ratio and the handling of the car. But I had a very good car when I went in that race.
Goldsmith streaks for the checkered flag and wins the closest race ever run on Daytona's beach and road course.
Now, you also qualified for your first Indianapolis 500 that year. How did it come about that you wanted to try your hand up there?
Oh, it's hard to remember. I met a man that was I was in the aircraft business at the time. And the biggest customer I had was Jack Adams from Memphis, Tennessee. And I was mentioning to him about that race. He says, well, I'll buy a car and let's take it up there and race it. But he bought that new type of car that they had that was it was the type of cars they're running almost today. And it was just too new to take it and run it. There's too many problems. So I don't think I even started the race with it.
Mr. Goldsmith, there were driver fatalities at Indy in 3 of the 6 years that you raced in the Indianapolis 500, either in practice or in the race. Was that something that concerned you, the safety aspect, or was that something that you were able to put out of your mind?
No, you pay pretty good attention to that, of how you drive in that track. And maybe you don't remember, but I was involved with a big wreck there. There's about 2 cars that was tangled up there in front of me, but there was a little gap that I could go through on top of up of the wall. So I started through that hole, and I got about halfway through the hole, and Unser was running, and he hadn't slowed up for that wreck, and he went up over the back end of my car and got my shoulder, and had 2 tire marks on my shoulder up here, the front wheel and the rear wheel, and I was lucky it didn't hit me in the back of the head, or I probably wouldn't be sitting here today. But that's the way I remember the race at Indianapolis.
Well, you did finish 2 times in the top 5 at Indianapolis, first in 59 and again in 60. Who were you driving for at that time, and how did it feel to do that well at Indy?
Well, Ray Nichols had built a car here just down the road from me, and he had built the car for Jack. I think his name was Adams, Jack Adams.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe, the man over in New York, I can't remember his name, and he owned the car, and they wanted me to end up driving it, and that's how I really started at Indianapolis, is through Ray Nichols and the man that owned that car.
Now, at some point in the early 1960s, you came back to NASCAR and you started running, I wouldn't say a majority of the races, but you were doing 15 to 20 or so NASCAR races a year. What brought you back to NASCAR?
I think because we was running up here in the north and I didn't want to haul the car all the way down south, because NASCAR was, all the races were in the south. And with the AAA run up here, it was a lot easier to run maybe 100 or 200 miles instead of maybe 800 or 900 miles to Daytona or down in the south.
Yeah.
So that's why I stayed in AAA up here in the north.
Okay.
Now, after you won on the beach and road course in Daytona, you also won a qualifying race at Daytona in 1966. Now, what was your reaction to that facility, that big track?
I just had a good handling car, and it steered very straight and stable. And that's why I ran pretty fast, I believe, because it had a good engine. It was built by Ray Nichols. And it was a good handling car. So that's why I ran pretty good then.
Now, was the size of the track something that impressed you or got your attention? What was your reaction to going out on the racetrack itself?
It didn't matter to me in racing if I was going out on a half-mile track or on a mile or 2-mile track. It didn't make no difference. It was all the same to me.
You've mentioned Ray Nichols a couple of times. Didn't you have some business interests with him as well?
Yeah, he was in this business with me at the airport where we rebuilt aircraft engines, and we had built it up to where they'd ship engines from Europe and all over the world and to us. We'd overhaul them, put them on a dyno, test them, make sure that everything was working good, ship them back to them, and it worked out real well for us.
Now, you did wind up, as Steve mentioned, with a lot of different business interests. You owned an airport there in Indiana. You owned an aviation engine repair business. You owned some fast food restaurants. You owned a pair of thoroughbred horse ranches. Is all those businesses, is that what maybe led you to retire as a driver?
Oh, I don't know. I think it's all them businesses was from meeting pretty good people, and to work with them was a pleasure. And that's what really got me going in different businesses. Like Burger King, had quite a few Burger Kings that we ran. And that was a pretty good business. And I don't know, I just kept trying anything, whatever might work.
Well, as we mentioned earlier, Mr. Goldsmith, you are a member of the AMA Hall of Fame, and you are a member of the Motorsports Hall of Fame of America. Do you look at that as a crowning achievement in your racing careers or something like that?
No, I can't say that. I don't want to brag on me. I was just lucky I had good equipment, good people working with me, and made it a lot easier to win those kind of races that it moved me up into Indy cars and things like that. So yeah, I was just lucky.
Now, once you did stop racing, did you miss it, or were you too busy doing other things to miss racing? I
was awful busy running. I owned the airport. I had a big engine business. We were the biggest engine in the world, rebuilding aircraft engines outside of the factories. And we were awful busy, so it worked out real good for us.
Mr. Goldsmith, do you pay any attention to NASCAR today? And how does that type of racing strike you?
Yes, I watched the races today, and I was down at Daytona and just looked around a little bit, race car, and I don't know. To me, it didn't matter what the car really looked like for me to get in it and and make it work. Because if you're going to make them work, to handle decent, and then have a good engine in it, and then you can race it. Otherwise, you might as well wasting your time.
So it's pretty much today what it was yesterday for you. If you don't have those ingredients in your car, you're wasting your time, right?
That's right. Same thing. So you just got to have good equipment and good mechanics working with you. And if you can tell them a little bit what's happening in the corner, they'll work with you and you learn how to make that thing handle. So that's basically why I was pretty good with driving a car.
Good.